Hello everyone, my name is Chris and welcome to the Training the Community Musician Conversation series. Today I'm joined by Mark. Welcome Mark. And we're just going to throw ourselves straight into the first question. So Mark, if you could tell us who you are and a bit about your practice.
I'm Mark Bick. I live in the Forest of Dean, where I was born and brought up in Gloucestershire, just on the border with Wales. And I disappeared off I did a music degree in Cardiff and then teacher training. I took one look at what was going, decided that trying to keep the rules in school was, I just laughed too much. I'd been a rule breaker all the way through, and having to be in charge of keeping the rules was too much for me. So I went straight into youth work and ran a project with unemployed kids and very involved with music stuff with that. This was in the mid-80s. And then moved on to be one of the founding members of Community Music Wales, which is very exciting. It was a kind of very communal thing, a real mixture of people. I was just one of many people that helped form it, and then I was lucky enough to be given the job to kick it all off, and then it grew like mad over the first 4, I think doubled in size every year. So I ended up rapidly learning a lot about admin and managing a small charity. Or an expanding charity, and I got into training very early in that, because as we thought about developing Community Music Wales, we realised that the most effective strategic thing we could do to develop community music practice in Wales was to train people. So we linked with what is now CM in London, and they ran some training with us. I think it's far enough ago now to admit that I think we had European funding for the London Borough of Cardiff. There was some interesting paperwork, yeah, but we did it, and we made very good use of the money, and a lot of some brilliant people that are still practicing today and doing great work. So that was my start. Excellent.
I always think that as community musicians, we kind of are rule breakers by sort of trade. It's kind of part of what we do, isn't it? It's just break the rules and push the boundaries a little bit. So it's always good to hear us being upfront about that.
The only snag is I've got an email on my computer now from my son's 4 and just started school, from his teacher saying that he's arguing all the time and he's only been in 3 weeks. I'm thinking, where did that come from?
I know, nothing to do with me at all. No, absolutely not. Oh, that's great. So that's a really good introduction to what you do. I wonder if you could maybe tell us a bit more about your training. You know, what training did you get, if any? You know, and what kind of journey did you go on in sort of developing your own skills?
Well, I always say that most of the skills I've used in my career were developed as a teenager in bands. I lived in a rural area. We had our own kind of band called Out of the Rut. We were quite agricultural. And we played around local youth clubs and things, and we decided to make our own equipment because we didn't have much money. And I learned to organise kit, organise rehearsals, run rehearsals, arrange, most of the other people in the band, I taught them how to play what they were playing, so I had to learn how to play it first and then to teach them. So yeah, and that a lot of the organizing and dealing with people, all those skills came mostly from that. In parallel, I did the traditional route and did music O-level and scraped through A-level, and then went off to university and didn't enjoy quite a lot of bits of the traditional music degree, and then I was interested in youth work but decided to do teacher training, and then I said, what happened to that? So that was I did get banned from one school for criticising their elitism, so I'm banned from life from a certain school in South Wales.
I think that's something to be proud of, right?
Well, yes, I was quite proud of it at the time. Yeah, so then because I was doing quite a lot of management, I wanted to. I've always been someone that wants to make things happen. So right at that youth project that I was working at. I started and I'd just spend time with kids, sit and listen. These were unemployed kids in Cardiff. I'd sit and listen to what they want to do and try and facilitate it. And then I would push. I always had that confidence that with a bit of effort, things could be possible. And we refurbished, create. So we got into computers and Ataris and things in the very early days and making music with that. We got drum kits and guitars, and so I'd always played guitar and I dabbled in drums and bass and other instruments as well. I was always one of those people that just loved picking up a new instrument and learning how to play it. So, and then I took on other people to help teach stuff. And so the snag was you get more and more bogged down in the management, but the advantage is you do actually get paid. And things can happen. And great things can happen. And as we started Community Music Wales, I came across people doing great work with adults with learning disabilities and young people with learning disabilities. And I'd always had contacts from my family background. We've had a foster system with learning disabilities. So and I taught other people from quite an early age. And so, it was a very gradual thing. And there were some things, teacher training, there was some useful stuff that came. I think one of the we had a very good psychology lecturer, and he taught us that just about the power of positive feedback, and also that if you paid attention to the person that was really behaving badly when they behaved badly, what they learnt was to get attention, you needed to behave badly. Whereas if you could manage to pay attention to them for the 3 seconds that they did something you wanted them to do, which could just be sitting quietly, then that would actually reinforce that behavior. And that was such a useful practical lesson. It blooming well works.
It's interesting because so much of what you're talking about is the kind of experiential part of learning. It's kind of being out there and doing it, but also that kind of idea that through some of that kind of more formal training, if I can call it that, it was the practical parts of that really made the difference.
Yeah, and it's easy to underestimate as part of church choir. So I learned to sing in harmony, to read notation. I had piano lessons. I was fascinated in harmony, so I got the church organist to explain, because school at what's now called year 9 wasn't telling me enough that I wanted. In grade 5 theory wasn't telling me enough about what I wanted to know about harmony. So he was explaining, more. I was reading A-level harmony books or undergrad harmony books by the time I was certainly in sixth form, and chugged through all that and got my head around that and was fascinated by it. And I was fascinated to listen and try and do cover versions of pop rock songs or whatever, and realize that they didn't follow the same rules as classical harmony, and work out that what was going on. So I had that kind of active inquiring mind, and a very good piano teacher and some other people with good classical, very formal choir mistress who was an oratorio soloist, but she taught us some good stuff, and that was great.
So a lot about curiosity. I hear there, and it's just about being curious and wanting to know more in a way.
Yeah, and loving music. So wanting to do it, just arranging and working out, and I loving making music with other people. So you have to work out how to deal. I remember vividly our band, we had a gig in Gloucester Cathedral Lady Chapel, was I think our first gig. My dad was a vicar, and the keyboard player had forgotten his sheet music that I'd written out for him. He was a notation reader. So I wrote it, had to rewrite it all out for him because I didn't have another copy from memory. And I just finished and he said, "Oh, I found it now." And that learning to kind of manage infuriating people in relationships and keep yourself calm, these are such important skills for being a musician and for being a music leader and teacher.
So that kind of maybe leads on to the kind of next question that we kind of want to ask, which is, what does training mean to you in the context of community music? So we've had a lot of people talk about mentoring, supervision, experience, the formal academic side, but what does it mean to you?
So for me, and when I talk about training with people that want to get into community music, I like to take a really holistic view. It's the whole process by which you get from where you are to where you want to be or where you need to be. So that, yeah, I suppose that's the learning. That's probably should be called learning. And then there's an element of it where someone else is facilitating it. So perhaps training should more be defined as the point where someone else is helping facilitate and enable that learning and shape that learning. And the means by which that happens, whether it's by mentoring, by whether it's sending you out to have a go at stuff, by whether it's apprenticeship, working alongside them, or whether it's actually, being taught. It's useful to be taught stuff. Those bits of theory, those bits of psychology. I've done training in counselling, in mentor. Along the way, I've taken opportunities because I love learning. So along the way, I've learned about accounts. I've learned about finances, managing that. I've got on courses on fundraising. I've been on a training the trainers course at a very early in the 90s. I think I did that, and stuff on mentoring, advocacy. There's all sorts of different elements in that package of what it means to be a good community musician. So I fairly recently did a free Open University online course about how to make videos and how to make community videos, and that's another element in my arsenal. So the training is about when you're using a structured course or another person, and I think we need to learn as learners to take responsibility and control of that process and learn to map our own way effectively through it.
I really like that idea of sort of developing our arsenal, our own personal sort of toolkit that we can draw on. How important has that been for you to continually build and develop those skills?
Oh, hugely. And as I get, the older I get, the more I realise. My dad was as well as a vicar, he was a counsellor, and he used to train people in counselling. So I think I was about 14 when I went on a course he led about small group leadership, which did transactional analysis, and that sounds like something really fancy. But basically, we sat and had a conversation in a group, and one or two other group members drew lines between the people who was talking to who when, and was it all gravitating around one person, or was it spread out, and how was that reflected on our experience of being in a group? Now, that understanding of how you facilitate a group that maybe to begin with is shaped and focused, where all the transactions come to you as the leader, to a group where people are interacting with each other and learning and engaging with each other, that's that's part of the meat of good community music practice to me. And it took me a while to realize, where did I get that from?
It's really interesting you talk about transactional analysis, because it's something I work with the students as well. And
all right, I had no idea.
And I suppose this kind of helps me link into this next question that we've got for you. And what I often find with things like transactional analysis, we're put off it because of the way it sounds, because of often the really complex way these things can be presented. But your description of how we can look at that is makes it so approachable. And I suppose that can be one of the dangers of training, isn't it? Is that there are certain things we don't engage with because they feel beyond the scope of how we could use them. And
well, I think there's some really important stuff here. I think academia has I think it's in human nature. Once you acquire knowledge, there's a desire to make yourself feel superior or above everybody else by mystifying that knowledge and making it so you turn it into something more complicated than it needs to be, and you edit. And there's a convenience. Once you get into working in a particular area, you can talk to each other in a shorthand by using a term like transactional analysis, which two people may understand. It may be utterly bewildering to other people. It's not self-evident what it means. So I think a good trainer demystifies, keeps, because a lot of it is just simple as anything. And a lot of people pick up a lot of this intuitively. And so there's within learning, within the whole sphere of learning, there's a lot of gatekeeping that goes on, and academia does this and hides away knowledge, puts it behind paywalls, and sometimes, you know, to make a living, there's a justification for putting stuff behind a paywall in all sorts of ways. But some of it is the mystification, the language. I think it's inequitable. It's damaging, and it's damaging to society. You can see why it happens. You can see some justifications for it happening. But right the way through my work, you know, I've done quite a lot of private teaching and guitar, piano, vocals, and you can have an approach where you hold knowledge to yourself and you make people dependent on you, and create dependency, or you can have an approach, and this is increasingly getting almost inevitable, where you point people, you say, well, if you want to learn a cover version of that song, here's a really good YouTube video of someone explaining how to play that song. They've worked it out really thoroughly. You can see them playing it. You can watch them any time of the day or night that you want to practice it. That's much better than you coming and trying to get me to show you how to do the cover version, which I'd have to learn off them for an hour a week and pay me a load of money for it. Yeah. Now, it's a bit frightening, letting go of that power and giving power to other people. But my experience is the more that so if I teach as a guitarist, I teach people to learn for themselves. I explain to them the principles of stuff so that they can learn for themselves. I'm empowering them. They become less dependent on me. So some students just go off. It's a bit frightening, but my experience has been that more people come back to you, and they come back to you and tell other people to come back to you. So it is an economic risk perhaps, but I think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it reminds me of years ago of something my teacher said to me, and I kind of went through formal training at the start of my career as well as a double bass player, and I very quickly found my way out of that as well, and into what we would call community music work. But I remember my teacher saying, my job is to train you to a point where you can replace me, where you can take my job, where you'll put me out of a job. And that really stuck with me. There was an attitude there about, you know, it's not, as you were saying, about holding that knowledge and only giving it bit at a time, but enabling me to evolve the way I needed to. So I kind of really connect with that thought that you've got there. So I suppose that kind of starts to talk us around this idea of the advantages and dangers of training a community musician. And I think that question comes from, we've heard a lot about the idea of the gatekeeper in academia being a real danger to the way community musicians develop.
So you do get people that go on the guru trip, and they'll do the same. You get academic jargon of making things sound far more complicated than they need to be, but you will also get the guru, negative element of the guru type approach, where again everything is mystified and made more complicated than it needs to be. And you know, I think a wonderful example in community music of someone who had all the skills, potential, and ability to do that and deliberately didn't is Frankie Armstrong in the voice world, and who kept things simple and didn't have that grandiose view of herself. And it's sad, she actually, you know, she hasn't had, I think, the recognition she deserves, all the money and coming in that she deserves. But I have huge admiration for Frankie Armstrong, for those that know about her, and if not, look her up. And what she's done.
Excellent. So if, if all community musicians had to develop 3 attributes or skills, the top 3 things that every community musician should have, really, what would you say they should be?
Paying attention, listening, focusing on the people you're working with, and you can learn. Actually, that's the most powerful way of learning. If you pay attention to the people you're working with, whoever they are, because whatever theories or knowledge you might have about who they are, what kind of people they are, what barriers they might face, they are a unique person, and you will tell the most by paying attention, listening to what they say, watching their body language, looking at their face, communicating with them, asking them things, giving them feedback, listening to their feedback, listening to their music, watching them playing and how they interact with whatever instrument or whatever with their voice. And if you listen and then reflect beyond the lesson, reflect within the lesson and or the session, and reflect afterwards, that will get you an enormously long way. And if you don't do that, no matter how clever and whatever previous training or schooling you've got, you won't be any good.
So that connection between awareness and reflection you see as the kind of biggest part, the observation and reflection, maybe.
Yeah.
Are there any other skills that you would say are important if we were to kind of add to that list?
So I'll wrap 2 up together. And that's good feedback skills.
Okay.
So, but I'd also put with that clear explanation. Okay. So a minimum of talking, but be able to explain, and it takes practice and learning to explain things clearly and simply. You've got to have a good grip of it yourself, and you strip down and explain. And if in doubt, don't say anything, demonstrate it. One of the best teachers I've ever seen in a certain way was I can't remember what island he was from the Caribbean. He was a steel pan teacher. He spoke a particular dialect of French Creole, and his English was not very good, so he didn't bother with talking. He just picked up the I can't remember what they called the sticks that you use for the pans, and he would just demonstrate something, pass it on, and kind of engage with someone. He would just use gesture and his eyes, and he would show something, get them playing, move on to the next person, and in almost a blink of an eye, you'd have a whole load of novices playing a tune on steel pan, and he would barely say a word. So that, how to explain it, and sometimes it is useful to use words sometimes, how to explain it neatly, concisely, and then giving people feedback. So he gave feedback just with his smile and his eyes to encouragement, but actually telling people accurately what they've done well, what isn't right, being perfectly honest about what's not right, and then what they can do to put that right. So my example that I love quoting is a lovely lass that I worked with in a pupil referral unit, who was known for having a slightly short temper. And she wanted to do some music, and she started singing Ed Sheeran, A Train. And we sorted out a backing track, and I got the backing track playing, and she had her lyrics written down on a piece of paper. She started singing it. And this is the first time I'd heard her sing. She was really shy about it all. She was brilliant. And then she sang one note that was out of tune. It was the lowest note in the piece. She shouted a whole series of expletives, threw her music across the room and marched out. When she calmed down and came back, I said, I'm really pleased that you cared enough about music, that you care enough about music to get upset when it went wrong. And I'm really pleased that you've got a good enough music ear that you could hear the one note that you sung out of tune, because all the others were brilliant. And she looked like me as if I was absolutely bonkers, because she expected me to go on about the swearing. But it was finding in whatever had happened the positive thing that I could feed back. I wasn't saying it's absolutely fine to swear in class, because in that unit the rules were that they couldn't, and I needed to maintain those rules. I don't deliberately undermine the rules in a place context where you're working. But that broke the ice, and she went on to get an arts award and progress and do all sorts. In fact, she went off and recorded about 8 songs with some mates of some people her mum knew or something, and brought in this brilliant recording about a few months later.
It's a lovely example. It's so nice to hear, because it kind of takes feedback that step further. It kind of goes beyond the obvious, doesn't it? It's about seeing what sits behind the reaction, which is something I really value in the way you're talking about it. You know, it would be so easy to sort of react to that situation, but I suppose what you're talking about is you responded to it, you went that bit further and kind of and found what actually sat behind it, which it's such a lovely example of that connection between clarity and feedback.
And then the other element, and this is where the technical knowledge and understanding of the community musician comes in, is that I pointed out to her that she couldn't sing that, the no note was out of tune because it was below her range.
Yeah.
And actually we had a backing track you could transpose up. I transposed it up, or either that or I played it on guitar. I can't remember what I did. But then she still struggled to get that note because she hadn't learned to sing it because it had been out of her range. But she did eventually, and that recording she brought back, maybe it was only 6 weeks later, she'd done it in the new key with those people, with the backing track that I'd sent her away with. I empowered her by sending her away with the backing track, and it was spot on.
Excellent.
And it was a delight to be able to sit with her and tell her that it was spot on. Yeah. She knew anyway.
That's excellent. Are there any other skills or attributes that you would add to that list just to finish us off?
Right. I was getting, yes. Yeah. I think your own musicianship and your own passion for music. So you have to know what you're doing with the music. You need to do things that if you're worrying about what you're doing musically or what's going on musically, then that'll get in the way. So both in a kind of technical way, you need to be on top of what you're doing. And I've seen people that are great, particularly teaching choirs, that are great with other people and their communication, their energy and all sorts, but there's technical things about their understanding of how harmony works or the arrangements or their pitching, which have just undermined it. Doing stuff with kids that's pitched too low, or all sorts of things go wrong if you haven't got a good foundational technical knowledge, which doesn't mean classical, traditional Western classical necessarily. It depends what you're doing and what sector you're working with, and then alongside that, the technical with the passion. The fact that you care about music and that the bonding with I love, I've been, this is years and years ago, I'd been introduced to Ed Sheeran by a guitar student before he became really well known, and I'd realized what a great songwriter he was and loved that music. That girl and I shared a love of great songs and music, and that there was a connection. And that's an element in social pedagogy, to use another jargonistic technical phrase. But so social pedagogy is a way of teaching that includes and thinks about the social interaction and the people, and focuses on that as well as the technicalities of the learning. And in that, they talk about that common shared, the power of that shared love of whatever you're doing together.
Excellent. So I think that's us coming to the end of our questions, and I just wanted to say a huge thank you for your responses and all of the thought behind them. So thank you very much, Mark.
So one thing I missed, and okay. You moved on. Can I briefly go back?
Yeah, absolutely.
You said about training and maybe the dangers of training, I think the dangers are rest in how it's done,
Okay.
and how it's set up. So I think if there's stuff that it can go wrong, if there's stuff that has a mold that's trying to fit everybody into a fixed mold, that creates, I think, there's been an anxiety in community. I've been involved in Sound Sense, National Community Music Association, since I think I went to its second meeting in the early 90s. And there's always been an anxiety because we have these wonderful mavericks and intriguing, the Phil Mullins and Frankie Armstrong, and for those that knew him, John Stevens from Community Music, who broke all the rules, didn't fit in. If we train, will we lose all that? And that's, I think there is a danger of that if you do the wrong kind of training. So you have to have training that sets people free, that helps people look at who they are and become their kind of music teacher, their kind of music community musician. And that is very different from what Ofsted and government ministers have done to schools. It's always what good teachers. I hate the creation of a dichotomy between community music and school teaching, because I think there's a huge, 90% of good teaching, great teaching, is the same across all those things. And it's about enabling, and if we're enabled to be ourselves, the best community musician we can be, that helps us enable other people to. So a specific example for me as a trainer, as you could tell, I talk a lot, I'm quite extrovert. And I've had people come to, and I remember one particular training course where we had someone that's even far more extrovert than me. It was absolutely brilliant, imaginative, wacky, crazy, did brilliant stuff. And there was someone else that was very quiet and shy and good, solid formal training, but they came to me part for, I can't be a community musician because I can't be like him. And I had to point, and I hopefully mentored and she's still practicing now, so I know she's continued, that quietness, stillness, that awareness, those of us that are buzzy and up and wacky can often leave people behind or exclude. And she had a whole tower of strength that she could bring and be her kind of community musician, which worked in different contexts far better than anything either he or I could do.
Yeah. It's a lovely point. It's that uniqueness that's allowing everyone to be themselves and be an individual, isn't it? Finding out what community music is to them rather than what it is to the trainer. Yeah.
So I hope that's helpful, but I wanted to get that in.
No, that's great. Sorry we didn't get it in earlier on.
That's all right.
Is there anything else that you want to throw in?
I'm sure we could talk for another 3 hours, but we need to stop somewhere. Absolutely. And hopefully there'll be meeting together more within this program and within what's happening and opportunities to discuss further.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Mark. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's been a joy, and I look forward to further contact and engagement.